Okay, so it is officially draft season. It's always a lot of fun to argue with each other about who we like better, which prospects we think have the better chance of being star players, all of that good stuff. But I wanted to do something a little bit different in this video. Typically on draft videos, we evaluate certain players, but I figured it's only fair to kind of turn that the other way. Let's evaluate how we, as guys grading players and trying to figure out who should be drafted and who shouldn't, let's evaluate ourselves. I think that's an interesting idea. So that's what I'm going to do in this video. I am going to figure out who is the best at evaluating the players. So there's several different ways that I could have chose to go about this, but here's what I'm going to do is first, let's talk about who we are evaluating in terms of their evaluation abilities. So I wanted to get a plethora of people from different places. So, for example, I have some mainstream type guys like Mel Kiper. We're going to evaluate him. Chris Sims, who's kind of mainstream, but also walks sort of to the beat of his own drum. We're going to throw in him in as well. Of course, myself. I have to throw myself in because it's only fair to do that if I'm going to evaluate others. Along with a couple other YouTubers, I decided to go with That Franchise Guy and Brett Coleman as a couple that often give great draft content, so I definitely recommend go check them out. It's That Franchise Guy on YouTube and Brett Coleman on YouTube, so if you haven't seen them, make sure you check them out. Also, I figured I got to just do the NFL, right? How they as a whole, what's their hit rate, and also I decided Pro Football Focus was the other one that I'm going to evaluate. So these will be the 7, and now we got to figure out, well, what's the grading scale we're going to use? I mean, it's very subjective, not just how good a prospect is going to be, but how good a prospect was after year 1. We're just going to use Pro Football Focus grade after 1 year. It's in my opinion, the best way to just, have a specific number some way. There's no perfect system. It's one we're going with, which I just figured that would be fair. Finally, as for the scoring system itself, pretty simple. If I looked at everyone's top 5 prediction for each positional category. If you got a player exactly right, if you landed on it, that means you get 5 points. If you said a player was your favorite prospect and they ended up being the second best prospect, then you get 4 points. And it goes all the way down to 1 or even 0 points. If you're more than 5 away, because there's a lot of prospects, then you get 0 points. That's how the grading scale works. Some players didn't get enough snaps to qualify. I just didn't include those, which you could argue maybe isn't totally fair because some of those prospects maybe didn't play because they weren't good enough to play, not good enough to get the snaps, but most of them were due to injury, so that's why I did it that way. Anyways, let's go over here. I know that was a lot of setup, but hopefully it was worth it for this now. So what we're going to see is that I haven't put anyone on the chart yet because we're going to go one by one, but we're going to have the predictor and then we're going to have their score. The score is going to be on average how many points per pick did they get. I think an important detail to also mention is not everyone had a true 1 through 5. There were a couple of people that maybe only had 4 favorites of a certain positional category, so I could not include a 5th, and that's why I'm simply doing points per pick as opposed to overall points, because it's just different. For example, also Mel Kiper didn't separate off-ball linebackers in linebackers the way I would have. He basically did linebackers as one group, which put edge rushers and off-ball linebackers together. So I just threw defensive ends, off-ball linebackers, and edge rushers all out for his predictions because I couldn't differentiate it. Anyways, at the top of the list, it's what should be at the top of the list. And this, when I saw this, I said, okay, yeah, this makes sense. The NFL on average gets the score of 3.08. So again, this means on average, for example, let's say the 3rd quarterback off the board. This means that on average, that quarterback would either be the best quarterback of the draft class or the 5th best quarterback of that draft class. That's how the scoring system works. That's basically where the NFL is at. That's a pretty good score. So NFL, the way they evaluate it, and you could even argue this is not a totally fair way for the NFL to evaluate them because there's a draft there where teams might value certain things based on scheme fits, whereas every other analyst here, they don't do it that way. They just say, in a vacuum, who's better. Next highest is That Franchise Guy. So, hey, give him credit, and he's not too far off from the actual NFL themselves. He had some really good predictions, like Greg Rousseau as his number 1 overall edge rusher, who ended up being PFF's number 1 overall edge rusher. So, very impressed with him. Marcus is his name. Again, can't recommend his content enough because he's better than all of us. At least he was last year. And again, obviously, you do have to throw in there, just because you nailed it for the first year, guys are going to get, better or even take steps back in the second year. That is going to happen, but I would bet that this is going to be pretty close to what we'll end up as, or maybe not, I don't know. But at least for 1 year, that franchise guy is there. Number 3, hey, it's me. I feel pretty good about this. I think that's a pretty good score of 2.88. I definitely had some big swings when I did that. So, it's kind of funny where I think that you're going to see people that just view this stuff differently. And I definitely view this differently than everyone else. I make a conscious effort to pay very little attention during draft season to what other people are saying until I made my picks. And then I'll go back and listen, because sometimes you get good points and good stuff that way. But I always try to make sure that when I initially evaluate, I don't pay attention to anyone else. It does result in me having some weird picks from here, from time to time. But it also results in me having some hits, which is cool. Next is going to be just PFF, and just to be clear, PFF, this is what was on the PFF big board. So the entire company came together, and that's what I used to evaluate it from last year. So again, we're splitting hairs between me and Pro Football Focus. I mean, if one guy ended up one spot differently, that might be enough to jump for them to jump me. So we're right there. These scores are very similar. That's another thing I noticed when doing this is, we're all pretty similar at this stuff. You have Mel Kiper, who tied PFF actually with a 2.83 score. So those two are tied. So again, like I said, if one guy went differently, Kiper would have jumped me. I think if a couple guys jump differently, maybe he jumps the NFL. Like it's all, relatively similar, relatively close, but still interesting. Next up is Brett Coleman. So there's, again, a little bit of a drop, but not much. 2.7 compared to 2.97 is not that big of a jump. Obviously, Brett Coleman, I think most of us agree, he's the godfather of film studies on this channel. I've talked about, many times before how I have a lot of respect for him and how he's basically grown this platform. And so him being in the range of everyone else makes sense. If you get, one or two slightly different, like I said, then he'd be ahead. So all in that range. Finally, at the bottom, we do have Chris Sims here, which it's a bit of a jump too. So that's I think a pretty significant surprise, I would say, at just 2.34 for Chris Sims. And, again, it's interesting. One of the things about Sims that he does is, like I said, he marches to the beat of his own drum for sure. Although, I want to also mention, I know some people might be upset about the Chris Sims low rating, or some people will be doing victory laps if you're a Chris Sims hater, but I should mention a little bit of that is by design with Sims. I know that he is someone who, he kind of views things a little bit differently, and I'm kind of using this as a bit of like a batting percentage type thing. How much do you get consistently right? But to some degree, a slugging percentage might be more accurate, because you see how he consistently hits on his quarterback rankings, but sometimes it takes a few years to get it. So kind of some of these big swings and big hits can work better than a little bit of like the batting average, where you might get more offensive linemen right and more wide receivers right and things like that, but you might miss on some of the stars that he pretty consistently hits on. So should throw that in there as well. And it's just 1 year. It's a small sample size. So I'm not doing too much of a victory lap for having a decent ranking myself. I don't think that you should look at this in a vacuum and say, that must mean that, this guy's a genius and this guy sucks, because it is just 1 year. And I'm interested in doing this maybe next year as well, and seeing where this grows and where this, evaluates from. Maybe we can do that next year. I think that would be fun. And also we could, continuing with the past draft and all that stuff. That's where I find things interesting. But yeah, I just figured this would be kind of a unique way to do this. The real reason I wanted to do it was just see, was I doing a good job? Because I did, me personally now, to talk about just myself, in the past, I have been doing a horrible job at evaluating these prospects. And I said, okay, let me, change things up. Let me do things a different way. Let me, as I said, don't watch anyone else's content until I've started my evaluation and gotten very far into my evaluation before I start maybe listening to what other people are saying. And I think doing that went a long way. It really made me get closer in a lot of these aspects. So because of that, I think that that's where things got interesting. So yeah, that's what I think. What do you guys think about all of this? Interesting stuff. Let me know in the comments below. Always love hearing from you. And of course, as always, thanks for watching.